Yes, well, good morning everyone, and thank you for coming along to this event, echoing Roxanne's comments. Just before I start on this one, I wanted to highlight a couple of good things that came out of the G20 for our whole community in terms of entrepreneurship. So in a relatively short communique of 21 points and 3 pages, which is much shorter than the other G20 outcomes, the word entrepreneurship was mentioned twice, so we think that's a really good outcome. And seriously, I think it actually is. And at the other end of the spectrum, the youth end of the spectrum, it was particularly prominent. So there was a whole paragraph on youth unemployment and youth entrepreneurship as a potential solution to that was highlighted. So I think that sort of feeds into this as well. If you think of the other end of the spectrum and increasing pressures on potential retirement ages and being more inclusive in the economic production system, if you like, of economies in later life, then this is equally an important topic. So I think it's on the agenda of important people globally, so this is a really good thing. Before I start the actual presentation as well, like Per, I'll admit I'm a sinner. I haven't really studied senior entrepreneurship per se very much before, but what I did do was go to one of our major research projects, which is called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, to try and understand, try and see what that tells us about the topic. And I've done this sort of at a very helicopter view before. I digged a little bit deeper. And so basically I'm going to do 2 things. One is to compare what Australian entrepreneurs, senior entrepreneurs are like compared with other countries, and that's what this data gives us. And then also compare the senior cohort with the rest of the population in Australia and see if there are any differences between the two that way. So just to give you a bit of a background, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is essentially the world's largest study of entrepreneurship. It has covered about 100 countries and currently runs between 70 and 80 per year. So QUT is the current partner, and our centre basically runs the study in Australia. And what it essentially gets at is what I'll call grassroots entrepreneurship. So just looking at the participation in entrepreneurship across the board of the community. And particularly looking at startup activities, and as well as that, it gauges the community attitudes and opinions about entrepreneurship, and basically benchmarks each country against each other by doing that. So a little bit more detail. I won't go through any of that in particular, but you can see how this is a large coordinated global study that we're using the data from. Importantly, Australia, QUT has participated for Australia in years 2010, 11 and 14. The rules of the program is that I can't talk in any great detail about the 2014 yet until the global launch of the report in January of the global report. But I can tell you that I had a sneak peek at our data, and everything that I say today based on the 2011 is pretty much is in line with what 2014 looks like. What has actually happened in 2014 is our entrepreneurship rate is lifted even higher than it was across the board previously. So overall it was around about 11% before, it was closer to 13% now, so everything has gone up a little bit, and that reflects what's happened in other developed countries as well. So basically the way the study works, to give you an idea of what I'm basing these comments on, there's about at least 2,000 adults are surveyed in each country each year. We get an entirely representative sample of the population, so to give us an idea of across the board who's doing what, and we look at entrepreneurial participation. You can see starting a business, running a business, or recently started a business, and We also look at what's happening in organisations. Are they doing entrepreneurial things as employees since 2011? And business exit is another component. And then, so that's for individuals who are doing entrepreneurial things, and for everyone in the 2000, we asked their attitudes about entrepreneurship. Okay, just to give you an idea of what it looks like across the globe, this is the entrepreneurship rate. So the left-hand axis is the percentage of the adult population that are engaged in either starting a new business, so they're doing concrete actions to start a new business, plus those that have started one in the last 3 years. So this is the headline figure of the GEM study, which is called TEA, Total Entrepreneurship Activity. And you can see, and they're broken up. The detail doesn't matter. I'll go into some stuff. I just want to see the overall trend here. The three groups that you can see across the bottom on the countries, on the left, factor-driven, which is, if you like, the underdeveloped economies. The middle is developing nations, and on the right is advanced nations, or what the World Bank calls innovation-driven economies. You can see over on the right, things are relatively, compared with the other groups, less. Okay, and the major reason for that, actually it's on the next slide, is there's a distinction between what we would call necessity, or what GEM calls necessity-driven and opportunity-driven. So in the less developed countries and the developing world, a lot of people are forced into entrepreneurial activities simply because they have no other employment options, and they need to do something to feed themselves and their families. There's a lot less of that, of course, in the developed world. And so what I'm going to base all my comments on for Australia, of course, is comparing apples and apples. So I'm going to compare us with the other developed nations. So that's just to give you a backdrop. And if we do that, I've already said that bit. That's the 2011 data on the developed nation countries, and you can see that actually Australia sits right up near the top. Closely behind the US, which is often considered, if you like, the bastion of free enterprise and entrepreneurship and all that stuff. So in an overall aggregate sense, Australia participates really well in this regard at that grassroots level of entrepreneurship. That doesn't mean everything is well. All right, so getting on to more the topic of today, of course, is how do things vary by age. And as Per mentioned at the beginning, so this is each of the major geographical regions of the world, with the age groups on the left is the youngest, 18 to 24. The major GEM report only goes up to 64, but most countries actually collect data up to 99, which I'll show you in a minute, but this was all I could get at the aggregate level. But as you can see, the young and the old tend to participate less. And the young are probably more likely to do other things like education, and the old are less likely to be in the labour force in general. So this is not exactly a surprising trend, but that happens everywhere. So how does Australia compare overall with other nations? So I've compared the developed country average, that's the blue curve. The green curve for Aussie green is Australia, and red is the USA. Now you can see that we're a little bit under the USA as we were in the aggregate, but we pretty well matched the trend, except the standout is actually the youth. And that's a different discussion that I had another time. But that might be explained by, I don't know, we've got to speculate here. I don't really know. It could be education. It could be the fact that we have a stronger social security system and there's less necessity entrepreneurship than in the US. But the seniors, you can see, is high relative to the average of the developed nations, and right up there with the US. So that's a relatively good thing, I think, for population. And, this is kind of answering my youth question, actually. If you look at the opportunity one and take out the necessity driven, we're right up there with the US everywhere. So where the US is actually ahead of us is in necessity-driven entrepreneurship, which is the dark side of entrepreneurship, if you like. So on the good stuff, we're right up there with the US, and I think, you know, at an aggregate Australian level, we can hold our heads high in terms of this whole space. And there you can see the opposite, the necessity-driven one, and you can see right across the board, and particularly for the youth, we're actually quite a bit lower than the US, and, well, generally sort of lower than the average, but maybe in the middle a little bit higher than most of those European countries. 2011, they weren't doing so well either. To put that in perspective, they were hit by the GFC harder than us. But that's how it's looking. All right, so that's the overall participation rate, and, you know, I think what it's basically saying is, compared with other countries, it's good news. Now I want to look at a range of things on entrepreneurial attitudes. Again, there's a big difference between the factor-driven, efficiency-driven and innovation-driven across the globe, so I'm just going to compare us with the innovation-driven, and also compare seniors, in fact, with the other. All right, so just to explain these graphs, and the next few are all the same. The blue column is the developed countries average, so just to benchmark against other countries. And then I've looked at 3 age cohorts in the Australian data. So the red one is, if you like, the non-seniors. The green is the sort of semi-seniors, so the 55 to 64, and then the purple is the oldest category in the data. Okay, so what can you see from that? Have I got little things coming on? Perceived opportunities aren't really so bad in this. Personal capabilities are pretty good for most of the category. In fact, the ones that are recently senior, if you like, if I use that term, are higher than the average, and and then it drops away a little bit. But, you know, things are looking pretty good in terms of, can I do this stuff at the start of business? Fear of failure. So this is asking, does fear of failure of starting the business prevent you from starting a business? You want this one to be low. And then the seniors actually, in fact, are even better than the general population on that characteristic. But the thing that is where they're lower than the rest of the population in any substantive way is viewing opportunities in their environment to start a business. So they're less prone to see that opportunity side of things for entrepreneurship, which, you know, I think is interesting. Trying to explain it, we have to do more research, Per. If you look at how so this set of questions is more about how they see the society in terms of entrepreneurship, so societal attitudes. So is entrepreneurship a good career choice? Is the status of entrepreneurs in our community high status? And are there positive attitudes towards entrepreneurship reflected in the media? Yeah, there's not a lot of great difference across all of that, except perhaps the good career choice is a little bit lower for the seniors. But I wouldn't say that there's anything much to make of in terms of differences on that one, except that a little bit. Well, okay. Then the last thing I looked at, going back to the participation, was one of the things that Per mentioned earlier. What types of businesses do the seniors start compared with the rest of the population? So here, and remembering there's this sort of up and down curve, here I've compared the developing countries, the USA and Australia again. Okay, you can see that the tail end, and then this is high aspiration, defined as we're going to employ 20 or more people. So that's for a little startup, you know, reasonably ambitious firm. And the seniors are actually relatively high on this, which I found, in fact, particularly interesting. And it comes across all the kinds of things you might look at Oh, so that circle's not really meant to be there. But see, for the seniors again, are we developing a new product or going into a new market with a product? Again, high for the, particularly for the 55 to 99s. And again, are we introducing a new technology into the marketplace?
That should be 65 to 99.
Oh, sorry, yes, I got it wrong all through. Sorry, 65 to 99. Again, you know, relatively high for those seniors. Now, I will word of caution. Relatively small numbers once you break all this up. You know, I haven't gone and actually tested the statistical significance, but the robustness of the trends, I think, sort of gives me reasonable confidence that this kind of thing is really happening. So what does all this mean? So, as I said, overall Australia is performing really well in terms of entrepreneurial participation. And there's even indications that the seniors are a little bit more ambitious in terms of some of the things that they might try to start up, and particularly if you compare that with other countries. This said, okay, counterbalance is that the participation compared with other age cohorts is still quite low, and you know, you can see it drops off quite markedly. Not surprising given participation in the labour force is low, but will that be a possibility moving forward? It's going to be more and more pressure, so that's you know, something that we need to address both here and in other countries, of course. And you know, Per mentioned the issue, and you know, the superannuation capital available to retirees is increasing and increasing and increasing in Australia as a counterbalance to the increasing retirement age. Is that a possibility? Of course, you know, that's got to be balanced against the risk of, you know, starting businesses with that nest egg versus other opportunities. So, I guess yes, Judy. I didn't do that because it breaks it down to too small. But what this has prompted me to do is when I get a chance, I'm going to merge across 3 years, get the sample size up a little bit, and I can do more breakdowns once I do that. But yeah, it was too small to even put up at this point. But good question. And so, you know, going back to Per's opening point, there's heaps that we'd like to know about or what this aggregate data is showing us at this point, and we're interested to find out. Yep.
Both of you are interested in recruiting a serial entrepreneur who is 67, who is an inventor introducing brand new technology involving nanotechnology as a sort of outlier.
Well, and maybe not an outlier according to that data in ways, but yes, we'd love to hear what's your story, or if it's you.
Well, still an outlier, but not
yes, yeah, true.
Not as much of an outlier as we thought when we entered this room this morning, right?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.